It's time for the JMRA Football Podcast, a podcast for the fans, by a fan. Yeah! Here's your host, Derek Jones.
Hey everybody, it's time for another edition of the JMRA Football Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Jones, here with you today as we run down all things National Football League. It is week 8 that we're getting ready for. Can you believe this? Week 8. It's going to be time for, you know how in school you used to get like progress reports midway through the semester? We're coming up on the time that we're getting to progress reports for our beloved midway point of the NFL season. But we've got some things to go over here in our own regard. First, we'll give you the social media rundown on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well, by simply searching Joe Montana's Right Arm. That's where you can find us. Also, you can check us out on the blog at joemontanasrightarm.com. I realized, see, this is one of the things that sometimes you get tunnel vision with making something from a social media perspective that you actually, like, I don't know, forget the facts of what actually happened. I made a post this week about how the 49ers in the 80s trailed only one time during a Super Bowl in the 80s. During that 4 Super Bowl run that they had in 16, 19, 23, and 24, they only trailed in the fourth quarter once. That's what I wrote. They only trailed in one fourth quarter, but they trailed twice in that fourth quarter when they trailed twice against the Cincinnati Bengals heading into the fourth quarter by the score of 13-6, and then eventually, of course, setting up the famous John Taylor touchdown, 16-13 later on before they score the eventual game-winning touchdown. And I'm just like losing my mind because people are calling me out on this online. One person said I had a conspiracy going to prevent John Taylor from getting credit for the touchdown to win Super Bowl 23. No. I'm dumb. That's what happened. Okay, there's no, oh, you tried to screw over John Taylor. I'm not even that smart. Okay, that was just an error on my part, a little bit semantics wordplay. It should have been 2 times, technically, instead of the one time. The one time, yes, I'm technically not wrong because it happened in one of the 4 Super Bowls in the 80s. Anyhow, those are the haps in the world of social media this week, but we've got other things to discuss, including Week 7, very weird week, because you had some games that I think weren't necessarily high-profile games that turned out to be pretty good. We'll run through all of that coming up in a second, but of course, we've got to get through our top 5 things that happened, top 5 takeaways from week number 7. We start the show in Philadelphia where the Eagles took care of the Dolphins 31-17. Very interesting game because the Eagles, it took them a little while to find their footing in the second half, but once they did, they took control of the game. And I'll say this, we've talked a lot about whether they look good or what have you, but they have been relatively exceptional, except for the Jets game, against when the game is even, when the game is in peril and they need a drive. They've been able to kill the clock in a lot of situations this season. We saw this against the Rams as well, where they just get you in this kind of sleeper hold, and you can't get out of your own way. The Dolphins had a chance late to potentially tie up the game. Tua throws an interception, and eventually the Eagles make it a 31-17 game and take it from there. That was after what was really one of the more bizarre start to the second half that we've seen this season, where the Eagles are up 17-10. The Dolphins can't take advantage of things going on. They miss on a 4th down, and then from there is a pick 6 thrown by Jalen Hurts. That tied the game at 17, and then the Eagles took care of it from there. So credit the Eagles. The Dolphins were limited to just 8 possessions in the entire game. And I'll tell you, one of the problems the Dolphins are going to have is anytime they play a team with a significantly stout interior, they're going to have problems. You're going to get a push up the middle against Tua. That's going to force him to move side to side a little bit. And when that happens, it's going to be tough for that offense to really reach its max potential. That's one of the tricks with the Dolphins. If you can kind of, you want this to be a north-south game if you're the opponent of the Dolphins, and not an east-west game if you're an opponent of the Dolphins. You'd rather have them going north-south than east-west. If they're going east-west, you're going to have some problems. And I think that's what happens in a lot of cases with the opponents that we've seen so far. And granted, most of them have been bad teams, but the reason why the Bills and the Eagles have done reasonably well against the Dolphins is because they have the lines up front on both sides of the football to kind of challenge the defensive line of the Dolphins and the offensive line of the Dolphins. And that game in the trenches has really dictated the two losses we've seen thus far from this Miami Dolphins team. So the Eagles improved to 6-1 on the year, top record in the NFL thus far, and another solid showing, by A.J. Brown. He was great, 7 catches, I believe, for 131 yards. Monstrous performance. We're going to get into a conversation coming up here in a second about whether somebody else should win MVP besides a quarterback this year. A.J. Brown's certainly part of the discourse, and yet again, the Eagles showed why they are the defending NFC champions. Number 2, I know there's going to be a rush to judgment, and I've already seen that a little bit over the Lions-Ravens game from last Sunday, but I think a couple of things need to hold out here. One, I think there's been a gross, and certainly I've been guilty of this, there's been a gross overreaction of a single game result from week to week for everybody. And it's like, Pat McAfee has this joke on his show, overreaction Monday. That's exactly what happens. We all overreact to what we see on Sunday, and it's this team is ready to go to the Super Bowl. This team is not going to make the playoffs. And we've kind of seen that. We're starting to see that a little bit with Cincinnati, where we wrote off Cincinnati in the beginning of the year because of their struggles, because Joe Burrow wasn't quite ready from a physical standpoint, and now they're slowly sneaking their way back in. We'll talk about that in a second, too. But the Ravens have losses this year to the Colts and the Steelers, so they have bad football in them. They do. There's no doubt about that. They're somewhere in the muck and the mire of the Baltimore Ravens, they have bad football in them. So I would not use last Sunday's game to say they are a Super Bowl contender. Could they win the AFC? Maybe. I doubt it because, again, I still think the receivers are a big problem in Baltimore. But it's a team that obviously is going to be in the mix as long as they stay healthy. They have Lamar Jackson, and because you have Lamar Jackson, you have a puncher's chance to contend in the AFC. On the other side of the Lions, I would not panic if I'm the Lions. That's probably the toughest game the Lions are going to play until they see Dallas later on this year. So they don't really have a lot of hard games left. They still have 5 of their 6 divisional games left. I believe they have the Chargers coming up later on this season as well. So everything that they need to do is in front of them. And as we're going to talk about here coming up in a few moments, the 49ers' hopes of getting a 2 seed, or the 1 seed for that matter, are dissipating with each passing week. And because of that, that's obviously going to open the door for somebody else to potentially have a top 2 seed in the NFC, and I still think that's going to be Detroit because of just how weak that schedule is. So I would not panic yet if I were Detroit. Toughest game Detroit's played all year, obviously, when you take a look at the game result, but on paper, you knew that was going to be a problem coming in, and it bared out that way. So I think that's the game. That's the game we saw on Sunday that a lot of people, I think, expected to see when it was announced the Chiefs would play the Lions in the opener. I think people were expecting to see that. But they saw that from the Ravens. Number 3, I am very worried about the Buffalo Bills. As we're recording this is the day after the Bills beat Tampa to start out Week 8, so they have improved now to 5-3 on the season, but I think there's legitimate cause for concern along the defensive ranks for the Bills. I don't like what I'm seeing from their defense because they're very feast or famine. They have to create turnovers. They have to generate pressure, and a lot of defenses have to do that, but there's not a lot of stuff they can do scheme-wise in the sense of damaging the opponent significantly because they don't have a lot of horses left at this point. A lot of significant guys. You lose Tre'Davious White at cornerback. You lose Matt Milano at linebacker. Those are 2 of your bigger names on defense. Clearly, Milano has played at a very high level during his time with the Buffalo Bills. You look at a guy like Daquan Jones along that defensive front. He's had issues staying healthy this year as well. So the Bills just have not been able to keep things together defensively. Now, the key for them, obviously, has been turning over the opponent. That came into play again last night. It made things a little bit hairier when you're able to get the turnovers, and they were able to get Tampa behind the 8 ball early on before Tampa got a turnover of their own of Josh Allen, and eventually were able to make this a ball game to the tune of 24-18. They eventually have a shot at the Hail Mary to win it at the end. I don't know what Chris Godwin was looking at on that game-ending play. It looked like he had a shot at it, but he just didn't see it. But it's unfortunate kind of how things played out there for the Bucs, but the Bills, they've got to find a way to keep chugging along. We'll see where things go for them. They responded relatively nicely after the loss to New England last Sunday, but we'll see if the Bills can keep things going. I think the concern you have to have, this is from the DVOA wizard himself, Aaron Schatz. The Bills' defensive DVOA, weeks 1 through 4, was minus 26.1%. That's very good. Okay, that's number 2 in the NFL during that span. Weeks 5 through 7, 16.9%. Plus, that's 28th in the NFL. So that kind of shows you where their defense has been over the last 3 weeks. So their defense is going to have some big challenges coming up on the schedule. They've got Cincinnati coming up. They've got the Eagles coming up. So they have got to be on their toes, and we'll see if they're able to hang in there in the tough AFC. But I'm very worried about them. Josh Allen has got to take good care of the football. He threw for over 300 yards in the win against Tampa. Also was able to knock out a couple of touchdowns as well through the air and one on the ground. He's got to play at an MVP level now every week. There's no question about it. The Bills can't have bad games from him because they're not good enough defensively to make it up. Number 4, will Patrick Mahomes win MVP again? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes when there's no significant candidate, and there are some good candidates this year, but nobody who stands out at quarterback, I think it's going to default to the mean. And if it defaults to the mean, it's going to default to the guy who has the best record, and it's going to default to the quarterback who has the best record in the NFL. And for the moment, that's the Kansas City Chiefs along with the Eagles. It's not going to be Jalen Hurts because Hurts has been a turnover machine so far to start out the season. Mahomes, though, who has, kind of been up and down as well, at least from the interception standpoint. He's coming off of a 400-yard week against the Chargers. Travis Kelce is heated up. It just feels like that's where we're going because the league is not going to name a wide receiver MVP. I think the best non-quarterback I've seen this year is Tyreek Hill. He's not going to win MVP. A.J. Brown has been exceptional this year. He is not going to win MVP. No wide receiver has ever won the Associated Press Most Valuable Player Award. And think about that. That covers some ground, right? That covers Jerry Rice with that amazing 1987 season in a strike-shortened year. That covers Randy Moss catching 23 touchdown passes in 2007. He didn't win MVP. Tom Brady did. So it's a quarterback award, basically. This is a year where I think we probably have some wiggle room there, but I really fear we're just going to default towards the mean and just give it back to Patrick Mahomes. And if that's the case, that kind of stinks because I think it is a great year to look at somebody else besides him. But because of how things have developed thus far on the field, who else are you going to give it to if you're not going to give it to a wide receiver? Number 5, the 49ers, man. Oh, boy. 49ers have lost 2 games in a row. They have Cincinnati coming up on Sunday, and maybe they'll be without Brock Purdy. Who knows? Purdy has some concussion-like symptoms after the game on Monday night and the loss to Minnesota. It was suggested on Twitter that maybe Purdy suffered a concussion during the game, and because of that, that's what led to the concussion-like symptoms he suffered on the plane ride home to Santa Clara, and that's unfortunately for him. The timing of this is just rotten because it's a short week and it's against an AFC team that, at least on paper, is pretty good in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. The 49ers defense did not play well on Monday night, gave up almost 400 yards passing to Kirk Cousins. Jordan Addison, the rookie wide receiver from Minnesota, had a very good week, over 100 yards receiving. And that's not like the 49ers. And I think that has to be something that's very concerning if you're a 49ers fan looking at that defense because, regardless of the struggles of Brock Purdy, and he has not really had any this year up until last Monday night, this has been a team that has been so stout defensively that they have really imposed their will from a physical standpoint on the opponent. That's not happening right now. And until that happens again, I think it's going to be tough for the 49ers to kind of get back in the mix. We talked about the Eagles maybe being the team that takes a step back from potentially getting the number one seed because of their schedule. The 49ers don't have a cakewalk either. They still have to see Seattle. They still have the Rams again. They still have to deal with the Eagles later on this year. So it could get tougher for the 49ers as this season wears on, which would be a shame if you're a 49ers fan because you thought maybe this year you take care of business in the regular season and then you get a chance at home field advantage in the NFC, but that may not be the case. Instead, the 49ers could be looking at not only missing out on the 1 seed, not only missing out on the 2 seed, but potentially being in a dogfight with Seattle to win the NFC West. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of the slate from Week 7. Jacksonville 31, the Saints 24. The Jaguars are starting to heat up. Remember, we talked about this in the beginning of the year. Jacksonville's schedule is lousy. They play all of their tough games at home. So this was one of the few times they stepped out and really were under duress in a situation. But they were able to get a fourth down stop of Derek Carr and the Saints to win it by 7. The Bears beating the Raiders 30-12. Tyler Bagent. Seriously? The Raiders. You've got to be kidding me. This man is not a Division I quarterback. A 30-12 loss for the Raiders. Embarrassing. The Colts lose 39-38 to the Browns in a hotly contested ball game that it looked like the Colts were going to win, but a late penalty called against Indianapolis and their defense. I believe it was an illegal contact call on the last drive set up by P.J. Walker. Eventually, the Browns are able to get the ball into the end zone to win the game by 1. I'll tell you, I don't know what they're going to do here with Deshaun Watson. Watson left the game with concussion-like symptoms. He's also still dealing with the shoulder injury as well. That's not helping. So they've got a lot of problems there in Cleveland at quarterback. We'll see how that progresses. But that generational historical defense we talked about a week ago went out and gave up 38 points to the Colts, including 305 from Gardner Minshew. So not good there from the Cleveland Browns, but they still come away with the win. The Bills lose to the Patriots 29-25. Best game of the season for Mac Jones, 272 yards, an impressive outing in a game where the Bills had a chance to win, but the defense could not get the Patriots off the field late, and that came back to haunt them. Giants 14, Commanders 7. Tyrod Taylor, 279 yards through the air, replacing an injured Daniel Jones. Jones will be out again this coming week for the Giants-Jets game on Sunday. The Ravens and the Lions, 38-6 win for the Ravens over Detroit. Lamar Jackson, 357 yards. This game was over pretty much right away. It was over from the jump. The Ravens just were all over Detroit to start out that contest. You could tell they were keyed up to make sure they proved that they were still among the elite in the NFL, and they proved that maybe Detroit is not among the elite in the NFL. Falcons 16, Bucks 13 in the bizarre NFC South as that division continues to roll along. A last-second field goal by Younghoe Koo of 51 yards. Baker Mayfield 275 yards, but the Koo field goal gives the Falcons a 3-point win, 16-13. The Steelers steal one from the Rams, 24-17. A bad spot on a sneak by Kenny Pickett allowed the Steelers to come back and hold on to win this game. They were up 24-17. Pickett tries for a sneak on 4th down. He gets stopped, it looked like. But when they did the measurement and the respotting of the football, they gave the first down to the Steelers and Pickett. The Rams had no timeouts left because they had burned all of them, so they couldn't challenge the play, and thus the Steelers come away with the win. Seahawks 20, Cardinals 10. Not much to speak of there. Geno Smith, 219 yards passing. Kenneth Walker III, 105 yards on the ground. The Broncos, 19-17 winners over the Packers. Man, I mean, if you're the Packers and you can't move the ball and score the ball on the Broncos, what are you doing? I mean, that's as bad as it gets for the Packers. Just an awful offensive performance by Green Bay. The Chiefs 31, the Chargers 17. Patrick Mahomes, 424 yards. Travis Kelce, 179 yards receiving. I love how now the fact that Taylor Swift is dating him, people are saying, oh, well, he's performing well because Taylor Swift is showing up to these games, and the games where she was not there, he did not play as well. People now acting like Travis Kelce wasn't already a Hall of Famer. Get out. Please. Please. Stop it. Stop it. I get what they're trying to do, but you can't even remotely joke about that narrative because the people will actually think that that's true. We talked about Eagles-Dolphins already. Eagles with a 31-17 win over the Dolphins. And then on Monday Night Football, the 49ers losing to the Vikings 22-17. A late interception thrown by Brock Purdy. That cost the 49ers a game ultimately. But to me, the big story in this game is, like I talked about, the 49ers defense just did not get stops of Kirk Cousins. And that was a big problem. If you can't stop Kirk Cousins in a one-possession game, I mean, it's not like we're talking about the 32nd best quarterback in the NFL, but without Justin Jefferson, you'd assume they'd be able to get stops on a consistent basis, and the 49ers just did not do that. All right, let's take a quick gander towards Week 8. Panthers and Texans, Saints, Colts, Rams, Cowboys. The best game of the week for my money is Bengals 49ers. If the 49ers lose, that's a third loss in a row. If the Bengals win, they take a step further potentially out of last place in the AFC North and kind of catapult themselves perhaps right back into the playoff discussion. They need that win significantly. If it is not Brock Purdy, it will be Sam Darnold getting the start for the 49ers. And how about this? How about the worst Sunday night football game we've seen in a while? Bears-Chargers. Remember, typically when they give you games like that on Sunday Night Football is because the World Series was happening. There's no World Series games anymore on Sunday. Do the schedulers know that? Because that would suggest they don't. And I get they thought that they were getting Fields versus Herbert, and you're like half right, but it's just absolutely erroneous that that's a Sunday night game. I mean, I will take Rams-Cowboys. I mean, you might even be able to sell me on Giants-Jets, but you can't give me Bears-Chargers. That is just erroneous. And then, of course, the Monday night game, Raiders and Lions. Not great either, but we'll see how it goes for the Lions. They should be able to get back on the winning side of things in Detroit, taking on the Raiders. And with that, we've hit the finish line of the JMRA Football Podcast. Check us out on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, as well by searching Joe Montana's Right Arm. Until next time, happy football, everybody. See ya.